Welcome to the Restricted Handling Podcast. This is what's been going on in China in the past 24 hours. Let's start in Hong Kong, because Beijing just made its point in bold underlined ink. On Monday, Hong Kong's High Court sentenced Jimmy Lai to 20 years in prison. Lai is 78 years old, founder of Apple Daily, and for decades the most visible, loud, and stubborn pro-democracy media figure in the city. He's been in detention since December 2020, much of that time in solitary confinement, and the sentencing hearing itself took less than half an hour. The charges, sedition and collusion with foreign forces, were tied to his newspaper's coverage of the 2019 protests, his calls for sanctions, and his meetings with U.S. officials. This wasn't a close call. The judges said Lai was the mastermind, the driver, the guy pulling the strings. They explicitly ruled that his intent was to undermine the Chinese Communist Party and push for leadership change. That matters because it tells you how Beijing now defines national security. Journalism plus foreign contact equals subversion. Full stop. Hong Kong's leadership celebrated the sentence. Chief Executive John Lee called it justice. Security officials reiterated that Lai's British citizenship doesn't count. Hong Kong and Beijing consider him Chinese, and that's that. His family, meanwhile, keeps raising concerns about his health: diabetes, heart issues, physical decline, but authorities insist everything is being handled appropriately. International reaction came fast, but stopped at statements. Britain called it effectively a life sentence. Australia, Japan, the EU, and Taiwan all criticized the ruling. Taiwan went a step further, saying Hong Kong should be treated as a warning label for what Chinese governance actually looks like in practice. Beijing brushed it all off. No concessions, no soft language, no effort to pretend this was about anything other than control. And that's the key point. This wasn't just about Jimmy Lai. This was Beijing slamming the door shut on any remaining ambiguity about press freedom in Hong Kong. If there was any doubt left anywhere in the system, it's gone now. Now, zoom out a bit, because as Beijing tightens internally, the external environment is getting rougher, especially in Japan. On Sunday, Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi's coalition won a landslide snap election. We're talking overwhelming numbers in the lower house, enough to basically bulldoze domestic resistance to her security agenda. This comes after she stirred up a diplomatic firestorm back in November by saying something Japanese leaders have carefully avoided for decades: that if China attacked Taiwan in a way that threatened Japan's survival, Japan could respond militarily. That was not subtle. Beijing reacted the way it usually does when it's unhappy: seafood import restrictions, tourism pressure, hints about rare earth exports. The usual economic toolbox. But here's the twist. It didn't work. If anything, it hardened Japanese public opinion. Younger voters, in particular, backed Takaichi's tougher line. After the election, China said its policy toward Japan wouldn't change because of one election and urged Takaichi to walk back her Taiwan comments. She didn't. Instead, she said Japan would act calmly, appropriately, and in line with its national interests, which is diplomatic code for "we heard you" and "no." With this mandate, Tokyo is moving forward on defense spending increases, aiming for at least 2% of GDP, possibly higher. They're talking about stockpiling munitions, loosening arms export restrictions, revising their national security strategy, and, this is the big one, pushing for the first revision of Japan's post-war pacifist constitution to formally recognize the self-defense forces as a military. That's a line Japan hasn't crossed since World War II. It's not guaranteed to happen. It still needs upper house approval and a referendum. But politically, this is the clearest opening in decades. Now, while Japan is finding its backbone, the United States is quietly shifting pieces on the chessboard. Washington is moving forward with plans to deploy up to 4 Virginia-class nuclear-powered attack submarines to HMS Sterling in Western Australia, starting around 2027. This is part of the AUKUS partnership with Australia and the UK, and it's not subtle what problem this is trying to solve. Guam is vulnerable. Everyone knows it. In any early-phase conflict with China, Guam is going to be under serious missile threat. Western Australia gives the U.S. depth, redundancy, and geography that's harder to hit and easier to sustain. Australia is pouring billions into upgrading the base. piers, training facilities, housing, radioactive waste handling, and building a nearby maintenance hub that could handle serious submarine repairs. From the Navy's perspective, this is about staying in the fight. If a sub gets damaged, you don't want it limping back to Hawaii or the continental US. You want it patched up and back on patrol. Australia officially calls this a rotational presence because it doesn't allow permanent foreign bases. But let's be honest, if it looks like a base and functions like a base, everyone understands what's happening. China does too, which helps explain why Beijing kept up pressure elsewhere this week. In the South China Sea, the PLA Southern Theater Command ran naval and air patrols from Monday through Friday, explicitly criticizing the Philippines for conducting bilateral air patrols with outside countries. The message was familiar. External involvement equals instability, and China alone gets to define what stability looks like. At the same time, Beijing highlighted progress on a very different kind of security operation, this one in Myanmar. Chinese authorities announced that more than 1,500 suspects tied to online gambling and telecom fraud had been escorted back to China after a joint operation with Myanmar and Thailand. Hundreds of buildings at the Myawaddy fraud complex were demolished. On paper, this is about crime. In reality, it's also about influence. China is showing it can coordinate cross-border law enforcement in mainland Southeast Asia at scale, shaping security outcomes well beyond its borders. Elsewhere in the region, there were quieter but still meaningful moves. China and South Korea held rare in-person defense policy talks in Beijing, the first in 4 years. They discussed reviving joint maritime search and rescue drills and reopening military communication channels that have gone cold. Seoul raised concerns about Chinese and Russian aircraft entering its air defense identification zone back in December, an incident that triggered fighter scrambles and formal protests. This wasn't a breakthrough, but it was a signal that both sides want guardrails, even as tensions rise. Finally, let's hit intelligence and cyber, because this is where a lot of the real action lives. Singapore disclosed that all 4 of its major telecom companies were targeted last year by a cyber espionage group known as UNC 3886. Authorities said attackers got into parts of the systems and pulled out some network-level technical data. No service disruptions, no personal data compromised, but that kind of access is exactly what you want if you're mapping infrastructure for future operations. Cybersecurity firms have linked UNC 3886 to China, and while Beijing denies everything, as always, the pattern is familiar. This wasn't smash and grab. This was quiet, persistent access. And in Europe, Greek authorities arrested a 54-year-old Air Force colonel accused of spying for China. He was a telecom specialist with access to NATO-sensitive material, allegedly recruited during an undeclared trip to China in 2024. Investigators found a second phone used to pass information to a handler, with payments reportedly ranging from 5 to 15,000 euros per item. That's old-school espionage. No malware, no 0 days, just recruitment, tradecraft, and money. The Cold War never really went away. It just updated its wardrobe. Thanks for listening and being part of the RH community. Please take a moment to leave a 5-star review. If you want to see some changes, email us at info@restrictedhandling.com. We also publish a daily written intel brief on Substack, where you'll find even deeper coverage of Russia and China, along with insights on Iran, the Middle East, and the DPRK.